be blamed for forcing or allowing the government to shut down. Is that how this is going to play out?
Not potentially being blamed. You're absolutely being blamed, because what's happening is just a 2019 version of what Trump tried doing. Having a shutdown for the sake of having a shutdown. To do what? There's nothing that's going to be gained. Democrats are not going to get anything out of doing the shutdown other than the blame of the American voters and a bit of hypocrisy, because they're angry at Elon Musk for cutting out the federal workforce and cutting jobs. Well, by having a government shutdown, you're effectively also preventing federal workers from going to their job, going to work, and getting their paychecks. So that argument is going to fall flat and actually be thrown in their faces during, the midterm election. So it's really important, I think, here is to point those hypocrisies out and recognize the pathway for Democrats to make a win here is not through a government shutdown.
Well, there's a question about the federal workforce. There's also a question more locally here inside the bubble about the workforce in Washington specifically, Brad, because one thing that this continuing resolution would do is actually take money away from the D.C. budget that had already been passed by Congress.
Not take it away from D.C.
Yeah.
The money that is in our budget is locally generated revenue. It comes from parking fines. It comes from district local taxes. But our budget has to be approved by Congress because we are not a state. That budget was approved for the entire fiscal year, which ends September 30th. They are now switching mid-course, taking our money and taking it away from us. And so if that happens, if the Senate and the president enact this, what happens is $1 billion, with the B, dollar shortfall for district residents. That is fire, that is police protection, that is road repairs, homeless services, drug therapy, school kids that have, special ed needs, all around, all the district things are affected. Mm-hmm. And by the way, there's a lot of members of Congress that their staff live here. And I don't know how they can look themselves in the face and look at their staff and make their quality of life worse for no reason. This money, they can't be used, this money, to calculate savings. This money can't be used for the federal government. It is our money. Essentially what it does is it gets diverted away from us for 6 months, and then they figure out later what happened. So it doesn't even calculate savings. So we're trying to figure out what happened here, why. It just seems, hopefully it's not just a mean-spirited attempt to thumb our nose at a Democratic jurisdiction, but I don't know how else to read it.
Well, most people don't understand how that works, and frankly, a lot of people resent the concept of the federal city. Here, Maura, if the mayor is right, if Mayor Bowser is right, and teachers and police officers are going to start being laid off, how does that start to play outside of the bubble?
I think it'll be interesting to see how that gets messaged to members of Congress and the impact that the rest of the country feels. I lived in D.C. for about 12 years. I understand that we're not considered, we don't get much sympathy from the rest of the country because they view everyone who lives in D.C. as a federal worker, which is not the case. So I think that, the messaging there is going to be important. It needs to come from other people than just the mayor. And again, this CR is not necessarily the best bill out there. Democrats recognize that. Republicans recognize that. But at the end of the day, Republicans own or, are in charge or the majority for the branches of government, and Democrats don't have much of a leg to stand on. And so by government shutdown, you're just hurting the same city, the same people, even more so.
Well, Republicans are the majority, and yet it is a tight majority, especially in the House, Maura, as we all well know. The continuing resolution did pass there yesterday, but not without the direct input and phone calls being made by the President of the United States. The Speaker could not have done this on his own, could he? And what does that signal about his Republicans' actually ability to lead?
Republicans in Congress, especially in the House side, are just in line behind the president. They were not going to do anything without President Trump saying, yes, this is what I want, go ahead and do it. I think the Senate is a little bit different in that regard, as they do tend to operate a little bit more on their own. But with the House being up for re-election every 2 years, it makes it a different dynamic. But again, their loyalty to President Trump and what the administration wants, they are in line behind him, and members know that, and they're not going to step out of line with Elon Musk. They're threatening primaries, threatening to put millions upon millions of dollars. Anyone who steps out of line, that threat is there, and a lot of members, that's what they're voting on, not necessarily on the merit of the bills, which is disappointing, but it is part of, it's just what's happening right now. That's the environment we're in.
And if I could quickly jump in here, that is part of the dynamic that Democrats are concerned about. If we throw down on this shutdown or on this CR, it won't be because we're protecting spending. What Democrats are concerned about is the idea that the president can move around funds that Congress has appropriated and do what he wants, and the Republicans, as she just said, are going to fall in line and not provide oversight. So what happens if the president, Elon Musk, go after Social Security, go after Medicare, go after Medicaid, which they have said they want to do, and they go after SNAP benefits? There's no accountability. And what Democrats are concerned is we have an opportunity here to insert some leverage to force Congress to assert its Article 1 oversight responsibilities to protect these services that Americans depend on. Yeah. That's what the shutdown would be about.
How do you see that through, though? I mean, you know what happens after 3-4 days of that. The pressure campaign is well underway. The phones are ringing on Capitol Hill. You've lived through this stuff.
Look, it's a tough, and for her previous speaker to suggest that somehow we're hypocritical or disingenuous is a load of crap. Like, we have voted with Republicans to save them from themselves to fund the government. Jeffries has delivered votes to Johnson to pass his own CR that we had no role in doing. So we have done this time and again to help Republicans govern. We are willing to do that when it matters. But what's different here is we have a president this time that's very unpredictable, that is unbound by the constitutional framework of our republic, and we're very concerned about what he's going to do with that money, and if he's going to spend it at all, right? Like, we could be appropriating money here that he then diverts to tax cuts for billionaires. And that's a very big concern, I think, for most Americans. Is why you're seeing them show up at town halls across America.
Maura, I want to get your reaction to something Brad was just talking about potential cuts to entitlement programs, because President Trump has actually said repeatedly he doesn't want Social Security or Medicare to be touched outside of fraud. Elon Musk, though, seems to have suggested otherwise on multiple occasions, including in an interview this week where he said those are the biggest things to cut. And I wonder how you think ultimately this actually comes down, knowing if Congress is going to have to vote for that. That puts a lot of members who are going to be up in 2026 in some serious political jeopardy.
Those programs are bloated. They're running out of money. Doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be cut. I think the comments that Elon Musk made in that interview are going to be played in political ads against Republicans, in the years to come. But it doesn't mean that we can't take a look at those programs and see where there's fraud, waste, and abuse. I think that most Americans would agree that they want those programs to be sustainable and to last. And if they're rapidly running out of money and are beyond, the ability to fund for many more years to come, then we need to make some changes and make some adjustments and find those issues. But again, to reiterate on the whole government shutdown issue, this is a 2019 all over again, when President Trump had a shutdown just for the sake of having a shutdown, did not get anything out of it, and didn't have a plan. And unfortunately, when you have Chuck Schumer, who is the leader of the Democratic Party right now, it's a using the megaphone and not having a plan, and I don't think it's going to bode well for Democrats. So we'll see how it plays out, but this isn't going to work for them. It hasn't worked for Republicans, so I don't see how it's going to work for Democrats.
White House, and back with us this evening's political panel, Brad Howard, founder of Corcoran Street Group, our Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Maura Gillespie, founder, principal of Blue Stack Strategies. Great to have both of you with us here. Maura, the importance of this occasion has a lot to do with the timing here. This is the first European leader to sit down at the White House with the president since Volodymyr Zelensky's meltdown with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance in the Oval Office. It also coincides with these retaliatory tariffs coming from the EU today. So far, no chippy words, though. They seem to be getting along well. Is this an important display of international politics?
It's definitely a good moment for the president and the vice president to be so welcoming to the Taoiseach. I think it's an important event that happens on Capitol Hill. I know when I worked for Speaker Boehner, it was one of my favorite events, the Friends of Ireland Luncheon. It's a nice bipartisan event, obviously with Irish American heritage. It's a nice moment for members to enjoy celebrating as it falls around St. Patrick's Day, which is coming up on Monday. And so this moment was good for all parties, essentially, because it gave them a chance to show what a good friendship Ireland has with the United States.
Well, and as we speak, if you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, we're showing you President Trump entering the East Room of the White House with the Irish Prime Minister for this reception. Again, there's a lot of green in the room, just like Maura and Brad have on for the show this evening. Let's listen in, if we can, to the remarks from the president.
A lot of very, very good Irish friends. But thank you all for being here. Even though it's still a few days away, I want to be the first to wish each and every one of you a very happy St. Patrick's Day. It's a big day. And as a lifelong New Yorker, nobody knows the Irish better than me. I know too much about the Irish. So let me begin by saying I really do. I love the Irish. I've had great friends over the years, and I love the Irish, special people. And I've been to Ireland many times. I have a lot of property in Ireland, actually, and it does very well, so I like it. If it didn't do well, I wouldn't like it.
Yeah. Maura, will this relationship, as strong as it may appear to be today, last beyond April 2nd?
Yeah, I think that the president, as he mentioned in his opening remarks, you know, got a lot of people in his orbit that have strong ties to Ireland. And so you imagine he doesn't want to make enemies with his inner circle of people or his friends back in New York. But I also think that people largely view Ireland as an important ally, largely too because of the good-natured relationship that we share with them.
Well, they're about to get reciprocal tariffs, though, right?
And he did make mention of the EU issues sitting right there in front of the Taoiseach, and you could see that the Taoiseach was a little bit uncomfortable about that and not necessarily as responsive. And maybe that's a afterwards conversation or a conversation that will happen between his staff and the administration, the White House administration, because I think that, again, to Brad's point, learning how to navigate and being able to navigate publicly with the president and his inconsistencies and how he likes to show up, to put it, and be flattered is typically how best to handle Donald Trump. I think that maybe that's a conversation between staff to have in the back end of conversations as opposed to in front of the cameras and for us to watch play out.